miraculous talents, and if it's reincarnation or not, could there also be a negative aspect to it of possession, as well as my comment, Ian, that the swine flu vaccine is now on the Drudge Report, reported in the London Daily Mail that 25 deaths have been associated with the vaccine itself, and that's been discussed on Coast to Coast.
Right.
People should read it and
it's an interesting
their congressmen and go against mandatory vaccination, which is coming.
Well, it too, David. If you read down that article, it too is a theory. It's believed to be linked, and it's discussion among scientists of whether or not it is linked. But I think that's a fair thing to question. But let's go back to what he was saying in his primary point there, Dr. Haisch.
Right, his comment about the autistic savants.
Yeah,
I do have something to say about that. Aldous Huxley wrote a book in the mid-1950s called The Doors of Perception, and in it he described his experience with mescaline. And he took the drug in the 1950s and then wrote about it. And he tried to describe what he encountered when he was in that state. And the state, of course, is very different than what he experienced in ordinary life. And the words don't really exist to describe what he felt, but he tried. But his theory was that what the drug did was to basically crack a mental filter, so to speak. And he saw this mental filter as being responsible for letting through a tiny bit of the consciousness that we have, but filtering out most of it, because if we were fully aware of the universal consciousness of everything, we couldn't live everyday life. And so he viewed the brain as not being the source of ideas and thoughts, but rather kind of a filter between us and universal consciousness that knows everything. And it filters out what we don't need in everyday life. And this brings me to the autistic savants, because they, too, can do amazing things, and yet at the same time they seem to have, in most cases, some kind of brain damage. So in a sense, you can interpret their situation as being one in which their filter is also cracked in a way, and therefore they have access to what Huxley would have described as a universal consciousness that lets them do the amazing things that they can. For example, Leslie Lemke was an autistic savant who played Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1 after a single listen without benefit of any piano lessons. Now, I would not think a human being could do that, and yet he did. So he was channeling something or other, some ability or other from somewhere that is very difficult to understand, except in terms of accessing some form of consciousness that is out there to be had, except that we filter it out in everyday life because we couldn't live if we didn't.
Yeah, it's sort of a way of maybe by comparison that each of us, our normal consciousnesses are 6 inches deep and a mile wide, but a savant might be 6 inches deep, 6 inches wide, and a mile deep.
Right.
And that if you hit that one pocket, it's almost unfathomable that somebody could hear something like that one time and be able to turn it back. But if one's consciousness isn't being spread over a wide area, but is focused just in one particular thing, what we might all be capable of. Carla is in Tallahassee, Florida, on Coast to Coast AM. Carla?
Hey, good morning, y'all.
Morning.
I have a question about animals and their consciousness. I had a pet that passed on recently, and I mean, do those animals? What do they in the universe? Do they have a consciousness like we do, or do they survive after death? Dr.
Haisch?
Well, you ask tough questions. I really don't know. My only experience is with a pet turtle. We have a pet turtle called Pogo, and she's very cute, but there's not a whole lot of consciousness there. But in terms of what the animals, what kind of consciousness they have, I would assume it is the same as ours, except in a much more limited sense. And perhaps there is an evolution going on. I mean, perhaps someday that animal consciousness of my pet Pogo will wind up, in a higher species, maybe a dog. Maybe eventually will become a full-fledged human being. I don't know. I tend to think the trend is always upward. I don't think that you can wind up coming back as an animal if you are already a human being. But who knows? The progression may be through the animal kingdom up to us. But as to what they experience and feel, I really wouldn't know myself.
Bill is in West Hartford, Connecticut, on Coast to Coast AM. Bill?
Yes, hi, Dr. Haisch. Hi, this is Bill in West Hartford, Connecticut. I'm an amateur astronomer, so I understand where you're coming from. I'm also an atheist, and I want to say 2 quick points leading to one question. Point number 1, another astrophysicist who you may be aware of, Dr. Victor J. Stenger, Stenger, wrote a book which I have in my hand now, God, the Failed Hypothesis, How Science Shows That God Does Not Exist. That's by Dr. Victor J. Stenger, Stenger. Point number 2 is about the space probe, which I know you know about, Planck. It's a European space mission that's in space now in orbit around the sun, was launched in May. It's going to start getting data this month. And within a year to 2 years from now, we'll have information about the Big Bang as Planck dissects the cosmic microwave radiation left over from the Big Bang. We'll know, number 1, possibly what happened before the Big Bang, as well as if there are infinite universes, the multiverse theory. In other words, because there might be gravity waves embedded in the Big Bang. So what I'm saying is, shouldn't you wait until we get more data, like from this Planck satellite, to know for sure regarding the ultimate ideas of the origin and evolution of the universe, if there really is a creator of the universe or not?
Well, of course, you can always wait. Go back to your first point. I know about Victor Stenger. I know about his book. And I have not read that book, but I did read the book by Sam Harris, The Letter to a Christian Nation. And by the way, I thought I would read that book and be rather annoyed at some of the anti-God statements that he makes, but in fact, I was cheering for him as I read the book because he pointed out so many obviously absurd things in the Bible that I was rooting for him by the time I was rooting for him as I read the book. The point about atheism is that being an atheist requires that you have a certain God towards whom you are an atheist, and there's certain perceptions of God that I would consider myself an atheist against. Certain types of God that you might conjecture that would cause me to say, yes, I don't believe in that kind of God at all. As for the Planck satellite, yes, I'm familiar with it. I don't see how it's going to detect anything that would tell us about what happened prior to the Big Bang. Its job is to measure the microwave background very precisely to determine what the distribution is of clumpiness in the early universe. And I'm not familiar with anything having to do with evidence for what would have come before the universe was originating in the Big Bang, because I'm not aware of what you'd measure to do that.
Bill, if Dr. Haisch is supposed to reserve judgment on the existence of God until more data is in, why don't you reserve judgment on the non-existence of God?
Let me give you, I was waiting for that question. The God of the Bible or the Quran, in other words, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, those kind of mystical gods that were created by man thousands of years ago when we knew nothing about the universe, the cosmos, or our planet. Those are crazy, insane gods of the Bronze Age. If you want to talk about the God that Dr. Haisch is talking about, that's some possibility. I would consider that possible, but not the Israeli or Judaism, Christianity, or Islamic irrational gods, mystical gods.
It would have to be a scientific God, because it would have to be, in other words, again, once more, in order for you to believe in a God, the God would have to be like you, except bigger and speaking with a deeper voice.
No. A God that is compatible with the scientific method and
exactly,
science. Because
you are a scientific person, that could be the only type of God there could be. So you're doing exactly what it is that you complain about other people doing. Primitive people, you say, had a primitive God. You are a scientific person, you want a scientific God. And the difference between you two is what? Always interesting, Bill. You're always welcome to call. We'll go back to your questions, your comments for Dr. Bernard Haisch. The book is The God Theory. As an astrophysicist, he looks at any number of different scientific theories, including multiverses, and comes back to a belief in a divine intelligence. We'll get more on that coming up, because there was a story on the website at coasttocoastam.com. Didn't get into it earlier. I'll save it to the end. And we'll ask Dr. Haisch about that coming up. On Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. Last half hour for Dr. Bernard Haisch. I've enjoyed this very much. I hope you have too. If you have Streamlink, of course, you can always go back and listen to it, share it with others. If you have Streamlink, too, you can share coming up this Tuesday night. I'll be doing the chat for George. He gets a chat night off, so let's call it Chatter Day this coming Tuesday, and I'll be online at coasttocoastam.com doing the chat just for the Streamlink subscribers. So if you're a member, hope you get a chance to stop by and exchange some Q&As. And those tend to fly back and forth pretty rapidly. It's a pretty good time that I love.